exactly. Hammer Steel Performance. Today is not a good hair day. That's okay. What we're going to talk about in this video is a comparison that's a little bit different than what we normally do. So this one here is actually 4 different 116 builds, but each of them had a different exhaust. So this is not a direct comparison. However, I still think there's some trends in there that each of these types of exhaust exhibit. So what's common? Well, one is they were all wide tire jackpots or hammers. They were all 116. They all had a compression ratio of about 10.5 to 1. They all had Lloyd S&S 495 cams. They all had Lloyd torque tubes. So they were all similar, with the difference being exhaust. However, we do know that there's variance between builds, and so this is not a true comparison of how each exhaust performs on a particular build. So it's not like we had one bike and then we tried all of these different exhausts on there. So the peak numbers don't really mean anything, but I think we'll be able to identify some trends that go along with this. And I think it will once again sort of highlight the importance. I know I keep getting tired of doing exhaust videos, but we only have a couple camshafts, we only have a couple intakes, and there's really, with that being said, the exhaust plays such a huge factor on the shape of the power curve and the output. And we're going to talk about that today with the 116 build. All right, let's move on. All right, before we move on, there's a couple things that I didn't cover. One of them is that the differences of the bike. So one of the bikes that has the RPW Thors did not have a rev extender in it, and so the ECU, started laying over, or power started laying over 5,200 or 5,500 RPMs. So that is one of the differences in there. And that bike also is a 07. The rest of them are all 2010 and up, and then that one bike was an 07. It's still, had a stroker and a big bore. One more caveat, okay? For those of you that are just going to look at the peak numbers, I'd ask you don't just look at the peak numbers, because again, these are all different builds, and so they're all going to have their own variance in there. But think about the trends, and again, let's sort of follow along with this and just understand what we think these exhausts would do if they were on the same build. Okay? All right, now let's move on. Again, thought we'd start with a spaghetti graph. So this is what you look like when you start overlaying 3, 4, 5 dynographs on top of them. So really not take a lot of this. What I want to do is highlight each of the exhaust that are unique. So the blue is a Victory Swept exhaust that a customer had a 116 done and didn't want to spend the money on exhaust and want to use what they already had. So that's the results on the blue. The blue is the Victory Swept exhaust. The red is RPW Thors, and again, this is the one also did not have the rev extender on it. The black is another 116 build with a Bassani 2 and a 2. And then the orange are the Conquest Custom ground pounders. And so those are 3 different exhausts that we use. We'll now go into the torque graphs and the horsepower graphs. All right. As we have this comparison, once again, 4 different builds, 4 different exhausts. This is no way a direct comparison. What we see, though, that may be valid trends are that if you have a well-designed long 2-2 exhaust or a 2-1 exhaust, that they make similar power from 2,500, 2,600 RPMs or so to 4,000, 4,500. The other thing that we see is that the swept exhaust, which is really a one-off unicorn on I would say on a 116 build, wasn't really happy until, probably 4,300 or so. And then the ground pounders, which is a well-designed short 2.2, was sort of saving itself, it looks like. It hasn't come up on the pipe yet, as they would say. It hadn't come on the camshaft, maybe it hadn't come on the pipe yet. But we'll take a better look at this going forward, okay? On this graph here, we're looking at horsepower. The previous graph was torque. So what can we extrapolate from this data? Without taking into consideration the peak values, because the peak horsepower values are not relevant because they're different builds. But what is relevant is the peak RPM that events take place. So, looking at the Victory swept exhaust, that pipe is on a 116 build with 495 cams and Lloyd torque tubes, is generally done making power at 4,500, 4,700 RPMs. And you look at that horsepower graph, it sort of stays relatively flat while dropping a little bit, and that is what I would call, or one would call, exhaust saturation. It just can't flow anymore, so it's sort of stuck at that horsepower level, and it just sort of trugs along, and it just can't make any more power. You see a similar event take place with Bassani 2 and the 2s. It's just that event takes place a little higher up in the RPM range, somewhere around 5,250, where that makes its peak power. The RPW Thors, if it had extended ECU, you would probably see that exhaust make its peak power somewhere around 5,500 RPMs. Based off how that graph is tapering off, or that's my estimate, about 5,500 RPMs is where that would make its peak horsepower. And then the ground pounders, they continue to make power out closer to 5,800, 6,000 RPMs. So when you're looking at your build and you're looking, what exhaust do I run? These are the things you take into consideration. You look at your where do you want your torque to be at RPM wise, where do you want your horsepower to be at RPM wise, and then you go ahead and make your determination on what exhaust to use based off of those parameters. I would feel confident to say that regardless of the RPM, the RPW Thor and the ground pounders would make the most, if they were comparing the same engine, they'd make the most peak horsepower. I believe the ground pounders might make the most peak horsepower at the highest RPM. Okay, let's summarize. Did we learn anything? I think so. I think there's some things we can take away, even though, again, this is not a direct comparison on 4 different exhausts on the same build. But I think we talked about throughout the video that these highlight the trends of those exhausts, and then how does that play out to what we're looking for in our build. Sometimes the reality is we don't know how to explain what we want. If we're not, technically astute at power curves or things like that, we struggle. So, sometimes it's the best you can do is to explain that, hey, I like to ride 2-up. I pull a trailer, I ride up a hill, or, I like to go to the drag strip, or I like to, hot rod stoplight to stoplight, those type of things, and communicate that to your Victory expert, whether that is the custom shop, Victory Southern Maryland out in Maryland, or Lloyd's Garage, Lloyd's Motor Works, whether it's New York or Charlotte, or Coastal Victory down in North Carolina, or the Vic shop out in Iowa, or call me. I get people call all the time. Yeah, I do work on stuff, but the bottom line is talk to somebody and explain what you're looking for. And I think the hardest challenge we all deal with is we see this World Wide Web, and we get on there and we ask questions to the masses, and everyone has an opinion, but sometimes that is not an informed opinion or opinion made off of data. It is opinion off of their build, and sometimes even worse than that, it's somebody that doesn't even have a build that will still give their opinion, which is okay. But when you're dealing with, your hard-earned dollars, and you want to invest those hard-earned dollars into making a build, in this case, we're talking about a big bore, then get as much data as you can. And I would always say reach out to those experts, because they're going to give you advice. Yes, there's a dollar sign attached to that. Absolutely, there is. But it is so much better than not getting your results because you made an uninformed decision. Cool? All right, thank you. Winch, what time's the hair and makeup people coming over? I got to do this big video for the people on Victory Land. Use a hair tie. Oh, okay. Getting ready to do a big video. Need some liquid courage. This stuff ain't easy. Yeah. Action. Scene 4, take 3. Whoa. Hey, you guys be quiet. I'm getting ready to start a video here in just a minute. All right. So what I need you all to do is really keep it down. When I hit play on this, the last thing I need to do is have a bunch of kids running around and making a bunch of noise. So do me a solid and be quiet, because Victory Land ain't got patience for a bunch of jackassery, okay? Oh, already hit play.